This is Krishna here, and I'm making a quick short video on one of the most important topics that I believe at this point of time as I speak. Today is March 14th, 2020, and we are really at a crucial junction in this calendar year where as a world we are coming together to fight this global pandemic called coronavirus. Specifically in this video, I am focusing on the impact this event and this phenomena could have on the economy, the world economy, and all economic activities. And this is very, very important because more or less every human being is involved in one or the other type of economic activity, whether you're an employee, whether you are an entrepreneur or a business owner. Everybody is really concerned and curious on how the events would unfold and how things would turn out in the coming year. So let's start with the basic facts. So the COVID-19 or the Wuhan virus, it was first identified on 31st December 2019, the last day of the last year where the outbreak was first identified. Now from there, it has just been a month or two wherein the world realized this is a different type of virus. The spread and the speed at which it is spreading is significantly different from some of the other pandemics. So first of all, let's look into the facts. The last day of the last year, which is 31st December 2019, we saw the first outbreak of this virus. Then it happened in Wuhan market of China, and it was called the Wuhan virus for some time. But very shortly, within a month or so, everyone realized this is something that can affect the whole world. And by 11th February, the World Health Organization renamed this virus as COVID-19, which stands for coronavirus disease, and 19 because it started all in the year 2019, the last day of the last year. Now, in the middle of the March, or almost as we end the quarter 1 of 2020, the whole world and definitely the financial world is at crossroads. So there are many questions that's coming up in the minds of the entrepreneur, in the minds of employees. Will there be massive layoffs? What is the situation now and where is it going is the fundamental question that everybody is trying to look. So from that perspective, let's understand the basics. Because fundamentally the question is, are we really moving into a recession because of corona effect? So before we ask that question, it's very important to have a common understanding of what is recession. So in its simplest terms, as we can see in this graph, every economy goes through cycles. It has to go through cycle. Cyclical nature is the fundamental intrinsic nature of any economy. So the times at which the GDP goes up, the upward journey is called the peak or the expansion phase, and the downward journey is called the recession. Over a period of time, through the cycles, through the sinusoidal waves, we can see the economy going up. Recession in many ways is a natural phenomena. It is a self-correction mechanism of economy to balance itself as it climbs higher over a period of time. So that has not to be misunderstood as something to be very, very scared or frightened about. Of course, the question when somebody asks, are we going into a recession, is, or probably can be translated better like this: are we really going to a depression phase, or will it be a temporary recession or a correction in the economy? It's again important to understand the difference, the distinction between recession and depression. So here in this graph, you can see it's a little more detailed. So over a period of time, as these troughs and peaks happen, as these expansion and recession happens, it's almost like the day and night effect. At the same time, when something slightly different happens, which is the point of discussion in this video, like the coronavirus, the COVID-19 effect, that's where there is a possibility that instead of a normal recession, there could be an extended period, that's one case, where the recession could take a longer time to come back into its peak period, or there could be a sharp fall all of a sudden, or in a much faster rate. The cycle or the graph could hit the bottom. In fact, it could hit a lower trough, much lower trough than in any of the previous few many years or cycles. That's when we need to be really worried about. That's where it's really tending towards a depression period. The new question is, will coronavirus affect or will lead to a depression in the start of this decade from 2020 to 2030 is the crucial question. Recession definitely with such kind of an impact. Already most of the stock exchanges has shown a downward dip, and it is going to happen. It happens with any natural disaster. It could happen with many other factors. We are going to look into each of them one by one. So once again, looking into what are the aspects that really cause this downward trend in the GDP. It can be largely classified into three. One is whenever there is a change in the supply-demand equilibrium, cumulative effect of such supply-demand, an imbalance happening in multiple industries together cumulatively can affect the GDP and can lead to recession. So that's the point we are trying to discuss through this visual. So again, a slight understanding of the basics here again. Demand and the supply, how this works. So take any industry. Let's take tourism and travel industry, because that's the one probably at this point people can relate to, because governments are closing down travels, putting visa restrictions. So naturally what we can see there is the demand is going to go down, right? So whenever the demand is at its peak, and there are lesser suppliers, as common sense says, there will be higher price, few suppliers asking whatever the price they want to. And that's how many services really start, especially new technologies and some of the niche areas. There will be very few suppliers who know how to give that service or create that product. And if there is a high demand out there, the price would be high. Over a period of time, many suppliers come into the picture. That graph goes up, as you can see in the blue line, and the demand is served more and better. And over a period of time, it comes to a point where it can be given at the lowest price point. Quantity of service and product can be given at the lowest price point. Below which, if it goes, it's not healthy for the suppliers. It is not feasible for the suppliers. So once again, it starts climbing up. So that's the point of equilibrium, where most of the demand in the society for that particular service or commodity, if it is travel, most of the travel is being served by multiple players in the industry at a healthy price, which is good for them and definitely very good for the customers or the consumers. So having this understanding and looking back into the concept of recession, yes, whenever there is a supply demand imbalance, there is going to be the first sign of recession. Here clearly for travel and tourism industry, that is going to be witnessed within, I'll say it has already started, but within few weeks it's going to really plummet. Reason being, the demand would be like really coming down. First, government itself imposing bans. Non-essential travel should be avoided, and even otherwise the consumers, the tourists who used to travel at certain period of time to certain countries, all are going to stop that travel for some time. And hence the suppliers, already you can see they have slashed the prices. If you look into international flight prices and all, it has really slashed, almost come to half or 1/3 of the price. And then after a point, there is no point operating that business. They would come to a standstill. So in that way, that industry will hit recession. Now bringing into the whole GDP perspective, similarly one industry after the other, because all these industries are going to be connected, like hospitality, if people are not traveling, hotels might remain unbooked. And again, other industries depending on hotel industry, one after the other can get affected. And this is what I said, as a cumulative effect usually brings a recession. In time, we have to look into The second aspect, which also affects whether the GDP and the economy will go into recession or not, which primarily is the policy, which primarily is a set of policies, essentially classified as the monetary policies and the fiscal policy, which in one line is like this. Fiscal policy is most to do with what government, uh, the governmental policies on tax cuts, etc. And on the other side, the monetary policies mostly coming from the financial institutions, even the central bank of the country. So again, if we look at why these policies exist, it is actually to smoothen out the graph that we initially saw. If we quickly go back to that, to whenever there is a sharper peak or uh, or a nose fall dive, uh, these policies are adjusted to bring back this equilibrium faster and create stability in the economy and the society. Having said that, many a times, because these policies are made on assumptions and forecasts and estimates, sometimes they get it totally wrong. Especially fiscal policies, because it is also political. Many times populist measures are used just a year ahead of the elections, etc. And that leads to errors in the fiscal policies. And just because of the policy change itself, recession can happen, and it has happened. In fact, some of the large uh, recessions, uh, the main attribution or the main cause of those recessions, like the Great Depression that happened in the in 1920s, majorly happened due to policy changes. So also we know global financial crises have happened, not really because of, say, natural disasters or pandemics like this, but sometimes due to deregulations. For example, the subprime crisis, where banks were not regulated, they were giving more and more loans to people who were subprime or who did not have the ability to repay these loans, as a result of which at some point there were too many homes which the bank also had, but at the same time there were not enough buyers to sell it. So the bubble that was created burst, and the entire economy took a big dip. And because it was US economy, it really impacted the whole world economy. These were the types of crisis that has happened in the global economy. And in that context, once we bring back uh, and come back to this point of time, once again March 2020, and the entire world is looking into a dashboard like this, that's where we see the potential threat of this phenomena. Because as we said, it all started just not even 90 days back, in the beginning of the year or the last day of the last year. And within a short span of 60 plus days, the number of confirmed cases have gone over 125,000 in the world. Of course, primarily till, I'll say, 2 weeks back, or till the last week of February, it was still looked upon as more of China phenomena. But it really became a global pandemic when Italy, the second most impacted country, the suspected cases reached numbers larger than 10,000, which in turn is definitely affecting the whole European region. As you can see in the list also, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, and many other countries are now in the list where coronavirus impact has started. Probably it is in the stage 1 or stage 2. So with this kind of numbers in front of us, and the kind of context that we built so far, now let's ask the question, like, if it's going to impact, so what are the industries that's going to affect, and how the sequence of this impact or the ripple effect would really happen when we look into each of these industries. So from that perspective, if we look clearly, every player in the travel and tourism industry is severely affected. Especially in the last week, it has been confirmed, and everybody knows in the coming quarter, it could be one of the worst phase in the last so many years for all the players in the travel tourism industry. Again, if we deep dive into it, go into the details, this is what we see on the left side is the report from the World Economic Forum, where if we look into the top ranked countries in terms of tourism and travel, it is Spain, France, Germany, Japan, US. And the entire list you can see 80% it is the European nations. And because Europe is the second most or probably the most rapidly affected regions at this point of time, what we can see is a complete decline in the entire world's travel and tourism GDP. It's going to have a severe impact, probably unseen in the last so many decades. Airlines industry already reports are coming out where they are estimating the losses could be of 100 billion plus because of this. But if we look into the manufacturing sector, that's where these graphs could be of great importance, because US and China, the trade relation between US and China, this is the major arteries out there, the US-China trade relationships. And what comes from China is going to, all the industries, if China is going to get affected, it's going to hit all these industries one by one, especially computers and electronics. We know for the entire world, that is the manufacturing hub. 1.5 billion population sitting out there, consuming products that's coming from different countries, especially US. Another impact that we can see is China is also a large market. First, service sector, clearly we are witnessing the impact there. All products coming into the service sector will slowly get affected, especially from the China's and US perspective. That's going to have the major impact on the overall economy. And later, the same demand supply challenges will happen at the agricultural sector. Having said this, let's quickly look into the overall exports of China as such. Electrical machinery constitutes of 26.6 percentage, and by this definition, it's many machineries and equipments which are used by factories outside China. If the components and the supply of the machines are not going to reach those places, the world production of economically valuable goods is going to have a major hit. Electronics, we just discussed, machinery including computers, is a 430 billion export segment when we look into China's top 10 exports. Plastics, we all know, furniture, these are all major export factors coming out of. Even the last 10th point is critical, because that has a close correlation with pharma, the organic chemicals and many of the key ingredients that's required for pharma industries elsewhere in the world also. The ingredients really come from China, and hence the price of pharma and medicines can go up if things continue like this over a long term. Thought of looking at the Italian market, machinery, once again machinery, vehicles, automobile sector, electric machinery, pharmaceuticals, plastics. These industries will have a major hit. Cost becomes crucial. If we look at where COVID stands, clearly what is coming out is COVID is, in terms of fatality rate, is at a moderate level. Like it is somewhere between 4 to 5% is the current average that we are seeing in terms of people getting affected and still surviving the disease over a period of time. 3 to 4%, especially in age groups of greater than 60 or above, is where death rates are really happening. So in that way, it is definitely in the mid-level or lower mid-level of fatality rate. But in terms of reproductive rate, the numbers have not really come up, but it is one of the pandemics which has very high reproductive rate. The speed at which it is spreading from nation to nation, from region to region, is quite high. The numbers definitely will be towards the 3 and 3.5, where we understand that during most of these challenges or pandemics, when it hit, what economy really saw was a kind of a quick V-shaped return back to the average cycle. But having said that, if it comes in combination with a bear effect, where the economy was already going down, and on top of that you have this pandemic coming into the picture, then it can lead to definitely deeper levels of recession. This time of, say, let's say US economy, which is really was witnessing a bullish trend. This effect of corona can be actually sustained. There could be a small temporary dip, but if things are back in place, the bullish trend could continue. What we saw, especially in 2002 times, the SARS times also, the economy really did not get affected, because even though the death rate and the number of deaths in US, etc., was very high during that time, the economy quickly recovered. But having said that, it's not the early 2000s, the 2003 where the SARS attack happened. Today, China is definitely the hub of most of the economic activities in the world. Manufacturing, it is the manufacturing hub for the entire world. So anything that's going to really hit China uh, for an extended period of time actually means disaster for the entire global economy. If we look historically, things have happened, uh, or things have not really impacted the economic activities, as even when there were large deaths of the scale of hundreds of thousands due to such pandemics. This time we have to be a little cautious, because center of the pandemic has been China, and hence it is a little difficult to look back into the history and the predict or say that it may not have major impact if things are on a bullish run. There be a structural thematic change in the economic cycle is one question to really ponder about. That's where once again we look back into the numbers dashboard. If this is not controlled within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and people, because of travel and other aspects of aspects that favor the spread of the virus, uh, continues for a week or two, then things could be really, really different, because this number can simply multiply by 10, can get multiplied by 10x. Look into another aspect of transmission channels. Just like the way uh, the coronavirus has its transmission channels through droplets and the fomites and the aerosols. They get carried from one person to another through these uh, transmission channels. If we look at the economy and how this impact is probably going to hit many organs of the economy or many areas of the economy, it would be like this. That is, as we are already witnessing in this week, as the stock market prices are plummeting or declining. Uh, of course, small scale investors would, the sentiments are already gone bad. But then if it continues for a larger period of time, the large scale investors would be the first transmission channel, or one uh, segment from which uh, it would have its first effect on the economy directly. Investors backing out and stock prices further plummeting to lower depths. At the same time, the same sentiment, especially with this kind of a virus, because it's really turning global, is the consumer spending. So how not to spend, how to save to travel or go through this tough period will all lead to a lot of less spending on many products, many consumers. So the overall consumer spending is clearly going to be the second effect. And the third is the entire supply chain going to hit one after the other. The lack of demand or the imbalance in the demand would affect the whole supply chain, where suppliers would also start closing or producing lower, and at some point shutting down factories, which in turn leads to the ripple effect of unemployment and further lesser consumer spending in many other industries. So that could be the layers or the step-by-step way in which this effect can impact the economy as we go ahead in the next 2 quarters. Is there a ray of hope? Is there anything that we can look up to? Now, honestly, answer is we do not know. At the same time, what we are in, as we are witnessing how the world is coping up with things, few trends that's coming out, and again looking back to some of the earlier times where such incidents have happened, it's good to bring to our notice that it is actually during these times that the digitalization and digital activities have gone up in those respective countries. For example, these papers actually discuss the topic that how SARS virus and its impact, the Hong Kong SARS crisis, really contributed to the birth of China's e-commerce. In fact, that was a time where two online retail leaders, Alibaba and JD.com, really rose to newer heights because people were initially forced and later they got accustomed to the digital shopping. Looking at the numbers, there is already spikes in digital shopping, universities getting closed down, and a lot of e-learning activities happening there. So many foreign students coming back to their country and still continuing the course through e-learning. Clearly, corporates are continuing their work. At the same time, travel restrictions uh, are pushing them towards more and more virtual meetings. Industries which were not used to virtual meetings, the manufacturing sector and many other places, uh, the traditional industries would now really makes use of these digital technologies, and there will be demand for tools, products, and services where business can be done digitally. Apart from that, another trend that is to be expected is, again from a risk mitigation angle, people would now plan. This could be a great learning lesson for many of the manufacturing industries to have a decentralized supply chain, and in fact the whole society and the businesses would now have a balance between the globalization or taking advantage of the globalization supply chain, as well as having a local uh, or let's say having an independent way of managing things very much locally and regionally, so that such large phenomena, if it's going to affect another country, still doesn't affect their business continuity. So what all of this means to the business is this: number one is to stay in balance, because clearly it's a turbulent time, and till mid of April, there will be many unknowns. So till a basic level of clarity emerges in those areas, it's very important not to do anything radically different, which means to continue most of your business activities in its right pace as much as possible, and at the same time, not really experiment with something radically different during this phase or this transition phase or this turbulent times. And secondly, it's very important to do an analysis and an understanding of how specifically to your industry it will impact. There will be a lot of news coming out uh, saying it is going to definitely impact the economy, many industries, etc. But specific to your industry, how, and specific to your customers, how this is going to have an effect, how this phenomena is going to have an effect, has to be separately studied and very objectively handled. And third is definitely use this as a you know a great place and a great time to reflect upon the business models and to check for possibilities in improving and changing the process with the use of new technologies. Having said that, it is not to be executed immediately, but definitely to be reflected upon and discovered. So with that, I close this short video, and I hope it brought a certain degree of clarity and understanding of the whole situation. Thank you so much.